Michael Curry, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, right on, Paul. Thanks for having me on. It's really cool that you do this to stay connected to everybody.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And we're doing a morning podcast, so we're both going to be fresh as daisies because you had a slot here in the morning. So tell us where you are right now in the world.
Yeah, well, I see. I spent over 20 years in Oregon and most recently in Portland. And then, yeah, during COVID, it just sort of kind of became apparent that it was time to do something different. So I had a remote job and uh, just traveled around the country for about 4 years, going around to different destinations. And yeah, ended up landing just last year or a little over a year ago here in Casper, Wyoming. So that's where I'm hanging my hat at the time being. And they say that Wyoming is whatever 10, 20 years behind the rest of the country, and I got to tell you, that's pretty okay with me, all things
That's just
considered.
fine. It makes you feel 20 years younger.
It does, yeah. People actually stop and have conversations. They don't just give you their social media. They actually want your phone number and they want you to call them. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I love Wyoming because having spent, I'm based in Denver, and so going up through Wyoming, we love it up there, and have friends who've migrated down, and so a lot of connections up there. So agreed. And so why Casper? What was it about Casper specifically?
Well, I spent probably 12 years in Bend, Oregon, which is
Hmm.
this cool little hip, slick, and cool town in
Yeah.
on the kind of on the east side of the Cascades. And it was a really nice town. They had a lot of skiing, mountain bike trails, river rafting, and a small enough town that you could get around in pretty easy. I helped start OSU's branch campus out there, and really, really enjoyed living there. Ended up raising my kids out there.
Yeah.
It was awesome. They could ride their bikes around. So yeah, it just became kind of a little too popular. And
Yes, it
uh,
did. Yeah.
again, just my personal opinion, having lived there a lot of years, it went from great to um, less than great. And in fact, now, I mean, traffic is just really bad there. So anyway, all that to say,
Yeah.
honestly, I just kind of ran out of gas driving around in my van. I went to a lot of different places, and I was sort of a little bit behind all the migration that's happening out of Southern California. And so a lot of these places that I went to that I had considered, like Boise, Salt Lake, St. George, had all sort of already become, big and popular. Anyway, all that to say,
Versions of Bend, right? They were kind of
or
suffering from the same thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they just become like at one point, I really considered Boise at one point, and it was for the fast. It turned out it was the fastest growing
Yeah.
town in the country during one period during COVID. Anyway, yeah, so I just sort of ran out of gas in Casper. I stopped here to do my laundry, and it was kind of a yeah. I was out climbing in Lander at the Lander Climbing Festival, and they didn't have a laundromat, and they're like, oh well, yeah, the closest one is Casper, Wyoming. So I drove to Casper and ended up spending a couple of days here, and it's just a delightful little town. I mean, there's like wild turkeys that walk through the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Um, it's easy to get around. People are friendly. I could immediately sense that. I ended up meeting some local people who showed me around a little bit, and I looked around at a number of other places. Like so, Rapid City was on my list. Laramie, Sheridan, a couple other places. But I ended up, yeah, just really kind of feeling like Casper reminded me a lot of the way Bend was back when I moved there in 2000. And yeah, it feels like I say, it feels like a manageable sized town.
Yeah.
It's not so small that you run into everybody every 10 minutes or anything like that. But
Yeah.
it's not so big either that traffic is an issue. It's got a lot of, oh man, the climbing out here is just unbelievable. There's so
So
many
talk
great.
about that. So you're an outdoorsman. So climbing is just one of the things you do. Talk a little about your climbing.
Yeah. I mean, so when I lived in Bend, I climbed a lot at Smith Rock. That was sort of my home crag. It's world famous as a climbing destination. And I would say I was mostly just a dabbler, just a kind of a recreational climber at the time. Um, Partly as I was raising kids, and
Yeah.
working hard and all that stuff. But um, yeah, when I moved to the Portland area in 2014, they ended up opening. I don't know if you've seen some of these new climbing gyms, but the new climbing gyms are like, have 65-foot ceilings, and they're giant. And it's not the old ones where we're just like an old warehouse where they stuck plywood on the walls and put
Right.
holds on. The new ones are these engineered buildings that are really high, and you can get in really good shape in those things. So I really started kind of going hard at it maybe in like 2014 and making that. And then during COVID, so actually the backstory is so I worked at the university.
Mhm.
I was at Oregon State University, and I taught on campus for about a little over 10 years. And anyway, my father passed away. I went through a divorce, and I was just having this crisis of conviction. Anyway, there was this opportunity that opened up. My daughter actually told me about it on what they call at Oregon State. They call eCampus, and
Mhm.
at the time, people were like, "Oh, it's a dead end job. You'll never get promoted. It don't." And this was 2019, fall of 2019 when I
Right.
joined. So, yeah, March 2020, all of a sudden online became the thing. And I was right where I was just in the perfect spot.
You didn't skate to the puck. The puck came and rolled over you.
Man, talk about like,
Right.
talk about charmed timing. It was really
And so you went to the e-campus as an instructor, and people were saying, "Well, that's not going to take off," and then COVID hit, or as a
yeah,
professor,
I'm an
instructor,
associate
not the right.
professor. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Because you got
Yeah.
your doctorate now. Because you, I've
Mhm.
studied. What talk about your? Just fill us in on that piece of it and how that came to be.
Yeah, I mean, so when I was when we were at the academy, obviously we were really fortunate because we were the first, if I remember correctly, and again, things get a little fuzzy back there,
Yeah.
but we were the first class, I think, that could declare a major. And
In that period, yeah, there was a new. It was a new idea. Yeah.
so I chose computer science because I remember, I remember the freshman year we were taking, oh gosh, what were we taking? Like I was taking history,
Right.
uh, calculus, English, and just getting creamed in all these classes. And the one class and Fortran was what it was, like this one required class, and that was like the only class that I didn't actually have to like work hard at, and I was getting an A. So when they asked me like, "What do you want to major in?" I'm like, "Computer science,
Computer
man."
science. This comes easy.
That's clearly where my giftings lie. So anyway, yeah. Fast forward, I went to grad school. Um, right after I got back from Germany, I went to grad school in Oregon. Ended up taking VSI and getting out in Oregon. I think that was '93. So with my
Uh-huh.
master's in computer science, and then yeah, I started a business. I was doing cloud software integration for small to medium businesses. I provided solutions to like over 100 small to medium businesses. And then there was a friend of
And the
mine.
cloud was a very different thing back then. Now it's just a natural thing that everybody uses, but back then it was a scary concept. You mean I don't have the machine in my building?
You're
So,
exactly right, Paul.
right?
Yeah, it was a brand new concept, and it was sort of a risky thing that we put our
Yeah.
these servers inside of a data center, and instead of writing the software on prem, we put it in this data center. And I remember my very first cloud was this data center that they just had these the gorilla racks in set up in the as shelves, and they're like, bring your own server. And I just had just basically a regular desktop that we had just beat
Right.
up and just set it up on one of those gorilla racks, and I hooked it up to a uninterrupted power supply, and that was it.
That was
That was.
it. Those were the days.
Yeah, and then of course, obviously, it migrated to those blade servers over
Right.
time. But
Right.
yeah, that was a good choice at the time. Anyway, all that stuff set me up to obviously have good experience to share with students. So there was an opportunity to teach a class for Oregon State University, and again, timing was just fantastic. It was right before I think this was like fall of 2008, and I could just sort of tell that things were off a little bit. So I was like, this might be a really good thing to kind of round out the consulting.
Yeah.
And then, sure enough, the financial crisis hit, and it just I was very fortunate to be, to be in a good spot where a lot of people went back to school. The programs were growing.
Right.
It really offset the downturn in my business at the time. All that to say, it led to me getting basically going back to school, getting my doctorate. And so, yeah, so I've been with Oregon State now for I'm not exactly sure, like over 12 years. I think might
Yeah.
be. Um,
So was
uh,
your business in Washington, or where was you were set up? I just got
Bend,
to look at
Oregon,
your LinkedIn.
in Bend, Oregon.
Oh, you were in Bend the whole time doing the
Yeah. Well,
business
no,
for.
let's see. So that's primarily where I that's where it was kind of my main gig. I
Yeah.
was in Bend, Oregon. But then after I started teaching for Oregon State University, I moved over to the Valley. Ultimately, ended up kind of heading up to the Portland area as well.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, excuse me.
So what was it about because you've taken a unique path um, fascinating, I'm sure, to all the classmates who have a chance to listen. What was it about computer science in the academy days through cloud technology and all that? What was it about that world that kind of drew you in?
Um, that's a good question. Like I say, it just seems like my brain just seemed to work really well with the computing stuff.
Yeah.
And, um, I would say now I have maybe a little bit more of a more of a people person and a big picture person. Like what I found for a little while, I worked in industry for a while, and what I found was the ideal software engineer is a super introvert
Sure.
who maybe doesn't have a lot of interpersonal skills. So I wasn't an ideal software engineer, but I was an ideal consultant because I had a mix of people and engineering skills. The thing that was amazing about being in the Army, I went Signal Corps,
Hmm.
and that was just great timing because the internet was just starting out, and here we were engineering these communication systems. Like when I remember when we were in Iraq, that's sort of like the only thing I still have on my resume from the Army days is
Yeah.
we engineered these systems that covered 1,500 square miles, processed 5,000 calls a day. And part of it was it included this connection to the internet, the ARPANET at the time, that allowed us to send and receive emails and transfer files, FTP basically, and which changed the ability for us to be able to do requisitions. So they would do supply requisitions, which in the past they would just record on a magnetic tape, put this
Hmm.
tape onto a plane, fly it back to wherever it was going, and we were able to basically just FTP that file there, and they could start processing it immediately.
Now, was
Um,
this Desert Storm time frame?
yeah, the first
So
Gulf War.
now, you have to have had an interesting path there to get you to that point because a lot of signal officers in Desert Storm were erecting antennas. So, how did you? How did you get there? Because obviously you studied computer science at the academy, but that was very rarely taken into account when you were a lieutenant. What was the path?
So I was a company commander at Fifth Signal Command and I was stationed in Karlsruhe, Germany, which was just an unbelievably great location too. I really enjoyed that, and I was at this little caserne that I don't know, it was an old whatever barracks that we had taken over. It was just like kind of like two city blocks,
Right.
just this gorgeous little this little caserne. Anyway. Um, our battalion commander ended up changing, and there was a new, not battalion, excuse me, our brigade commander changed out, and the new brigade commander came in, and he just said, I want to change all the company commanders out. So I had kind of a short company command, and I was a little
Hmm.
irritated with that at the time.
Sure.
Like literally 1 year, and that was it. And but what they did is the general who was in charge of Fifth Signal Command said, "Well, we're going to build this truck basically, and on the back of this truck, we're going to put a bunch of servers inside of it, and I'm going to give you a bunch of basically." People who were engineers, sergeants who were engineers who normally only work back in the garrison. These guys had never been in the field before.
Yeah.
And I want you to hook this up to, I want you to send this downrange, and I want you to hook this up to the internet, and I want you to provide, and to the telecommunication systems. I want an officer who knows those things. And so since I've been a company commander and I was a computer science major, they
Right.
put me in charge of this thing. And it was,
Isn't that
I mean,
amazing? How like that just came together, right? There you are, like
it was a really good opportunity. And honestly,
absolutely,
the power that we have now, I mean, like my phone probably has as much computing power as that was on the back of that truck.
absolutely.
But it was a big deal, you know. I
It
mean,
was a
and
big deal. That was a cutting edge idea, let alone like what you were doing, right?
and I've got some cool pictures of just picture this, this truck covered in camo with these big satellite antennas pointing, provide, because we had multiple transmission systems, but of course the sexiest one was this big satellite antenna pointing
Right.
up in the sky, and yeah, and there we were in camo. you know but it was, I mean, we had air conditioning inside of these things and generators and
Yeah.
coffee, and it was a pretty good gig. So yeah, all that to say, I was in really good shape when I went from there. I went back to I was supposed to go back to the academy and teach, but so I went to grad school,
Right.
and that got short circuited by getting out. And but
Just out of curiosity, before we get to that interesting bit, so when you were in charge of that project, were you attached to an S3 shop? How did that even work? Because you weren't just a floating out there. How did they do
No, I
that?
mean, so what happened is, obviously it was this general's initiative, and I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I'm blanking on his name. I should be a little bit more appreciative and gracious about him because it
Yeah.
was such a good opportunity. But we had a lot of attention. Yeah, I mean, several officers probably out of the S3 shop at Fifth Signal Command
Yeah.
who were sort of our liaison, and essentially anything we needed, they made sure we had it downrange. And then most of the people in the S3 really had no idea because they were used to like going out and putting a telecommunications switch in,
Right.
giving everyone phone lines, fax lines, which were things at the time. We had a
Yeah.
SCIF, which is a secure operations center that was
Yeah.
encrypted. We had weather. So those were the normal transmission stuff that we were used to setting up. But this was a brand new thing, and nobody really knew what it was or how to do it. So they were just all sort of looking at me saying, you tell us what this is. So I had to go to these briefings
Right.
every day and give a status, after everybody was giving all these status updates on everything else. They had the weather, the enemy situation, all that. I had to come in and give this report on what our systems were doing, and I could have told them shit from Shinola, and they would not have known the difference.
Right. We're
I would,
bouncing things off the moon. Oh, wow, that's exciting. You keep
yeah,
after it.
and my sergeants would sort of like baffle me with a little bit of bullshit and
Yeah.
give me some techno speak, and so I would go in there and tell them oh, we're having issues with the 3B2 server, and the
Right.
Linux and they were like, oh, well, what is
Right.
all that? So it
And
was,
then did you take that technology over to the Gulf? Is that what happened?
yeah.
That's
And
great.
it was all cutting edge stuff at the time. Yeah, so it was great. I mean, like I say, honestly, I had heard about this thing like, called the internet and IP addresses, but I kind of thought it was a fad. I didn't really
Sure.
realize it was gonna be the thing. And then so when I was kind of fast forward, when I was when I was in grad school in Oregon, all of a sudden, you know, they came out with the web. I mean, and basically what the web was is it was a program that ran on computers
Yeah.
that were connected to the internet.
Yep.
And so computer science departments were sort of the location where people had a computer that was on all the time, that was being managed by a responsible staff
Hmm.
and was connected to the internet.
Yep.
So there I was in the computer science department in grad school when all of a sudden the web became a thing. And so I immediately started working on that. I taught classes on it. I did research on it, and that was my first job. Was out of that was writing web applications for a company called Tektronix in the Portland area,
Yeah.
and I wrote some of their very first web apps for the organization. And like I say, it was really fun. I loved it. I'm really grateful for all of those opportunities. But I just sort of hankered after being told what to do for so many years.
Sure.
I really hankered to sort of chart my own destiny,
Hmm.
if you will, and be in charge of it, for better or for worse. And I certainly made some bad choices initially, because one thing they did not teach us at the military academy, they taught us a lot, but they did not teach us how to manage organizational finances and
Yep.
do sales. I mean, it
Right.
was all about like pleasing committee and the generals and look good and and stuff like
Yeah.
that. It wasn't about like customer value propositions and accounting practices and
Right.
sales and stuff like that.
Sales cycles and budgets were not part of the agenda. Right.
Yeah, yeah,
And you had
yeah.
to we all had to get an acid bath in that when we, everyone thinks going from the army to the civilian was really easy, but man, it was some tough sledding trying to learn that stuff because these other folks had 5 years on us when it came to budget cycles, for example. Right. So, yeah, yeah. And what
You
was
know,
the
the,
first stuff you got involved in when you got out?
Well, what I was going to say, Paul,
Yeah.
one thing about the military, gosh, you just taught us, we changed jobs so often. And then, at the academy, they threw so much hard engineering at us.
Hmm.
I mean, I teach in an engineering school now, and the amount of the number of courses that we took is still more than what these engineering students now are taking.
Right.
I mean, I remember 5 semesters of calculus, 4.5 credits.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was, they just continued to just force us, taught us how to learn, and I think that ability, and then of course in the military, again, like for example, having that. It was called the dash, that digital assemblage that they had me in charge of, just like learning, forcing yourself to learn that stuff and it just really kind of sets us up, I think. And I notice that now teaching,
Hmm.
my veteran students tend to be, they're just not stressed when they have a final and a couple of classes and an assignment a project in my class that they have to do. They're just, their demeanor is just a lot more relaxed, and the quality of their work is just higher than those who haven't had that experience.
Right.
Um, so yeah, we're just used to approaching those challenges and kind of working through those, I believe.
I think that's right. Yeah. I think that's right.
Yeah,
It's
and
almost
so
like any task that comes our way, well, eventually we can figure it out with enough cycles on it, right? Kind of thing. There's very
yeah,
little,
well,
very rarely do we become overwhelmed. We just say we're going to keep chopping at it. Yeah, that's right.
you'd asked. I think we started on this thread originally about the climbing.
Yeah.
So I like I say, I picked up climbing as a hobby, and like I say, I started going hard at it in 2014, and then like
Hmm.
basically in 2020 when I went. So in 2020, I was teaching online, and it became a thing. It was during COVID, and everyone was during a lockdown, and I was like, I don't really know, because I remember when we were in Iraq, we had to sleep in our gas masks,
Yeah.
and so they were kind of like, the whole COVID thing was like, wear a mask, blah blah blah, and I'm just like, if this is, I mean, if this is anthrax or whatever, I mean, so I sort of was like, I don't know. It seems like the biggest danger is, psychological and political with
Yeah.
other people's perceptions are. That was sort of my take on it. And so I just decided, I was in the process of selling my house anyway. So I just
Hmm.
after I think during the summer of COVID, when they sort of like lifted the lockdown, I just sold my house. I had a van, and one of my customers was they had renovated RVs. That was their, and I had told them, I said, I'm going to get a van, and they're like, when you do, we'll take care of you. And so I had this van, and it was during COVID, and they weren't as busy as they were, so they just took great care of me.
I can
Converted
only
this.
imagine the electronic equipment you had jammed into that thing.
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, it's 58 square feet.
Right.
So that's a queen size bed takes up about 70% of the available room in the
Yeah.
thing. I mean, so I have a fold up bed actually, but anyway, all this it's pretty cool, the conversions that people do. I mean, the first time I saw one of those, I was at a climbing crag, and I just saw somebody had this old FedEx truck that had the stickers had been peeled off, and opened the door, and I looked in there, and I saw a bed and a little kitchen set up there, and I was just like, that's genius.
Right.
And so obviously, with Instagram, things have become a little bit nicer. So I was willing to accept much less, but my clients provided me with much more comfort than I probably deserved. So I ended up having a really nice setup. And yeah, so I mean, it's a little challenging, like to go from a stable living situation to living in a van, being homeless, a
Yeah.
homeless vet.
So was the idea that you were going to go to climbing locations as a backbone for the travel, or just travel around?
Yeah, and mostly it was to get out of the lockdown, because the
Right.
lockdown in the Northwest was
Right.
onerous, and and again, I don't know. I mean, people have different views, and I think we all had to sort of find our way and all that. But to me, it wasn't the best. It wasn't the right path for me. I didn't feel. And what I experienced was out climbing was that there were a lot of very healthy people who were not concerned about that and seemed to be doing just fine. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I had sort of a migration pattern. And like I say, I was able to work remotely.
Yeah.
So, I would be in these meetings, where I could just see that people were struggling a little bit, inside of their homes still, and I was thriving out
Hmm.
on the road. And so, yeah, kind of my main things is I did climbing. I went from climbing destination to climbing destination, did a ton of climbing, and it was just I just find that that's um, just a super great outlet. It used
Yeah.
to be, I think, maybe a little bit more dangerous, but the modern equipment is so good that I think it's a lot safer sport than, for instance, snowboarding or mountain biking. Or I also think it's a more balanced sport than even like one arm sports, like racket sports, like pickleball or tennis,
Uh-huh.
where you're only using one side of your body. It's a very balanced sport, and it combines kind of some technical stuff in setting up anchors, along with some athletic stuff in maybe similar to like swimming or something like
Hmm.
that, where you're using your body to. And then there's the whole kind of like setting a goal, um, you know, uh, challenging yourself at the limit of your ability, coming to these obstacles, and then having to sort of evaluate your options for how to overcome these options,
Hmm.
and then persevering, going past these obstacles, and then getting to the top and having this mountaintop aha, experience. So in a way, it's a little bit like a metaphor for life. Um,
Yeah.
and I feel like during COVID, it also taught us to sort of manage fear, because
Hmm.
you're constantly having your anxiety levels elevated, but it doesn't become something that paralyzes you.
Hmm.
You learn to manage it. So
And I'm not a climber, but I know it does have a very active community around it. So there's a social aspect as well, I imagine.
it is, yeah. It's a pretty healthy community. We're all um, again, and you know what I like about it again, Paul, is that these are people like in our military days, when you would go out on a whatever, an FTX or something like that, it was like, this is the time we're meeting, this is the time we're departing, this is the location we're going, and this is how long you're going to be out there. And it doesn't matter what comes up, you just make those things happen.
Right.
Um, what I find is that in generally in life, people make plans, but their plans are a little more loose and squishy.
Hmm.
But climbers very much appreciate that, that sticking to that timeline and following through on commitment, no matter what the conditions are. They have grit, if you will, is like the
Hmm.
term I often use. So it's a community that I really enjoy being a part of, and I'm mostly climbing around these people that are a lot younger than me. Most of them don't know how old I am. Like I went to
That's the
10 sleep.
trick. Don't tell them.
Well, I went to 10 sleep 2 summers ago, and I met these climbers, and it was dark, and we were like, I didn't have anyone to climb with them. We were like, let's climb in the morning. And so in the morning, we got up and we hustled, and we ended up going to wherever it was we were going. And then we got there, and we grabbed our ropes and gear and hiked up the hill. And anyway, we got to the base of the crag. And at this point, we finally started looking around at each other. And this is like the first time we'd really like looked each other in the eye. And their first question was, "How old are you?" And I told them, and I'm like, "How old are you guys?" And they're like, "Well, we just graduated from high school. We're
That's
19
funny.
now." But we had
Well, I
we
mean,
had
anybody who's seeing this would agree that you've kept well. So I mean, there's a lot of range in what on what people might think your age would be. But yeah, that's funny. And you're doing a thing that's not usual for people our age to be doing. So that's a credit to you. So. And
I
so,
think
how in settling into Casper, there's a climbing community there. How socially, how did that transpire? Because the reason I ask is that many of us are retiring now, and some people are moving to new areas, and not that we're old and leathery, but making new friends might not come as naturally as it did when we were 18, 19. How has it been settling into Casper?
Yeah, that is. I think that is an important consideration too. Is having activities and kind of a way to connect with people. I feel like again one of the things that we have in the military that's going for us, or from being prior service, is the fact that there was always this constant turnover, and you always had to be sticking out your hand and saying hi to the new guy
Yeah.
and introducing yourself. I think we have an advantage in doing that over people who maybe have stayed inside of a bubble for a longer period of time. But
Hmm.
yeah, for me, I think I mentioned the climbing. And so definitely climbing has been an avenue for me to meet a lot of people here. I also do a lot of other sports. One of the ones that I'm involved in is the acrobatic community. And so I helped start an acrobatic group here in Casper, and that's been pretty good. I think over the last like year and a half, I've had over 100 people come into one of our classes. I teach it at our local gym. And so I've had over 100 people come into one of our classes or one of our practices. And so I've met a lot of people in the community through that. And
So
then
explain acrobatics a little bit, because certainly we're all familiar with gymnastics. How is it different?
It's a relatively new sport. I think it came out in, you know, uh, after like maybe 2015 was when it first started. But
Uh huh.
I think what our pitch is that it combines the flexibility of yoga, the strength of acrobatics, and the healing potential of the human connection. Because
Hmm.
again, like climbing, you have to have a partner in order to do it. And so then you have to have a skill in mind about what it is you're trying to do. And then, like in gymnastics, you have progressions of how you get to that skill. And it could be something that's very, very simple and super approachable, like I'm just gonna balance somebody on my feet, and we're real low to the ground, just a couple of feet off the ground.
Hmm.
Or it could be a more complicated skill. One of the ones that I'm working on right now is being able to do a handstand on top of somebody else's hands,
Yeah.
which
Right.
goes all the way back to the court jester days. Basically probably the beginning of time, and it's really kind of a cool skill to be doing. Um,
And so people will come into a class and learn at the levels that they either start at or have progressed these different things that we've seen in different performance environments, for example. Yeah.
yeah, like Cirque du Soleil would be an
Yeah.
example of a performance you might see. Um, and I think there's more performative arts like now. So a lot of people come from yoga because that's sort of a natural progression. And then I'm always recruiting people off the weight room floor,
Is that
um,
right?
trying to get them in there, like going, "Hey, listen, you're really strong. Come, come be a base and just and check this out. If you don't like it, just." And um, some people do. Some people come in and just sort of get their Instagram photos, and then that's it for them. But
Right. Here's me
but
balancing on a chair or whatever. Yeah,
you know,
right.
some people are really into, again, I think what it does is it feel so. Kind of getting back to your original question about how do people that are transitioning from full time into a retirement, like how do you find your thing?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is you sort of got to try a lot of different stuff, and then something will really speak to you because it fills a need. And I think for a lot of people, there is a little bit of a social lack, kind of a lack of social connection, and that's a need that they have.
Yep.
But they also have a fitness; they also want to stay fit as well. So, kind of being in an environment where we're all just laughing and joking and trying something and falling and
Hmm.
spotting each other and giving each other cues, and then all of a sudden doing it, figuring it out, and then getting this great picture of us all stacked on this, in this cool shape, is a real fun thing to do with people. Um, yeah, and for me at least, and it really fills a need for me, and then also for a certain number of people that kind of come into it, they feel really connected to it as well. So
So how did you
basically,
discover it enough that you actually set it up? Because what was your first encounter with it?
the climbing gym that I was at
Right.
in Portland had classes, and a girl I was dating at the time was like, "We need to go check this out."
Yeah.
And kind of like, so do you remember when we had to do the indoor obstacle course?
Sure. Yeah.
So I didn't know this, but like all of a sudden, I found out during the indoor obstacle course that I was good at it, and that I
Yeah.
was good at these things. I had never known that about myself, and so anyway, going to this acrobatic class, I went and picked it up pretty quickly, and seemed to be picking it up faster than some of the other people. Seemed to be pretty
Yeah.
comfortable with it, and it just became one of my things. And a lot of the climbing areas so like for instance, I spent a lot of time in Las Vegas
Hmm.
because the climbing is really good there, and there's a really strong circus community in Las Vegas
Right.
as well. And
Naturally. Yeah.
so the training, so I was able to do, so basically what I was able to do is I was able to climb during the week. I was able to do acrobatics at night and then work during the day. Um, and it was a pretty great
What a
experience.
life you lead, sir. That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, thank you.
I love that. And so when you set up in Casper, did you find a location? And because really you need, it's like a wrestling room, right? You need mats to absorb if
We
people
do.
fall. And that's about it, right? How'd you organize it?
We have a really nice gym here. It's I tried several of them. I went to several of the different gyms, and I ended up at kind of it's a really large gym, kind of like an athletic club, and they have CrossFit stuff, and they have 5 studios in there. And one of the
Okay.
studios is just completely dedicated to yoga, and so I just introduced myself and started doing acrobatics with some of the people there, and they were like, "Oh, that's really cool. We don't have anybody doing this." And I said, "Well, it's really been an important part of my journey, so
Yeah.
maybe I could help teach these." And they were like, "Oh yeah." And so they hired me to start teaching these classes, and I went, and then over December, I actually went and got certified. I went to Hawaii and got certified
You did.
as an acrobatic teacher. Yeah.
And did you obviously had to show some skills, but then you had to show you were a teacher? How did you certify out? That's fascinating.
Thing. Well, I mean, obviously, teaching teaching at a university level sort of gives you
You got an
and then,
advantage.
well, and do you remember
Right.
how they taught us? Do you remember like in the army how we had to do PT? You know, what I mean,
Yeah.
turn and bend. You know,
You're
what
left,
was
my
that?
right.
You know, the 4 count push up. You know, I mean, so I mean, at a real young age, we all were.
Yeah.
I think we all had some responsibility to instruct people, and so standing up in front of a group and saying, "This is what we're doing," you know, has never been super intimidating.
Right.
Um, yeah, and then just learning some skills, and there's a lot of resources on YouTube that breaks it all down. And like I say, it's all about progressions. So the skill looks complicated, but there's always a series of progressions. And then once you've learned, um, whatever, maybe there's like 5 different major styles, that you're interested in. And then once you learn the kind of the progressions about these 5 different styles, you can start putting them together in different ways. And
Yeah.
so it goes from being, just this big conundrum, confusing thing to, something that's a little bit more manageable, a bit like assembling technology pieces,
Right. Now, are there events like not conventions, but gatherings,
festival.
like national level gatherings, things like that?
Yeah, we just had one in Denver. Yeah, I was down
Yeah,
there,
right.
and I was down there at the Colorado Aqua Festival just beginning of March, actually. Yeah,
And are those
um,
competitions or are they more demonstrations?
it is not a competition. Yeah,
Huh.
it's really about it's a super collaborative thing where we're all trying to support each other, meet each other where they are, and level you up. A couple of steps.
Okay.
And so I've been
So it's like
going
a
to the
math class more than a gathering to learn, basically. It's great.
yes, yeah, and they have usually a lot like multiple tracks at a lot of different skill levels. Um, yeah, so it's a great place to learn, and I've been going to these for actually that was right when I first got introduced to acro. Literally 3 weeks after my very first class, the largest festival in the country was right there in Portland, and they said, "Oh, you should go to this."
Yeah.
And somebody was selling a ticket and so I ended up going, and so I was just like, "Wow!" Because it was like there was 750 acrobats there,
Right.
and it was sort of like, "Oh my goodness!" So this is what's capable. So
Look at what these people are doing.
yeah,
That's
and
great.
this is kind of like this is and it was just like, okay, well, if I really focus on this, like the climbing, it's something that I can get better at. And it's a great way to meet really active people,
Yeah.
which appeals to me a lot, Paul. It really does. Um, I don't know if I mentioned this is actually part of my journey also, but I quit drinking like maybe 24 years ago. I haven't,
Hmm.
and I have to say that was like the best decision I think I've ever made because um, instead of I don't know that I ever really was a I don't know that I was ever really drank more or less than other. I think I drank about what was average. Do you know what I'm saying? But it was
Yeah.
just a lifestyle choice that I made, and yeah. So now I have a lot more time and a lot more energy
Hmm.
that I feel like is paying a lot of dividends because for me in the evenings, I'm looking to get my my endorphin
Hmm.
fix,
From another
and going
source, right? From a
right.
more
Yeah.
productive source. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes, that's really kind of I feel like that's sort of given me a real advantage. Uh,
Absolutely. Well, there's so much conventional wisdom about as we reach this period of life, all the systems of balance, total body strength, of course, nutrition that fuels that, but all these things are the things that help us age more gracefully, and that
mhm.
you can really actually offset a lot of the aging by maintaining a balanced kind of routine, right? So learning how to yoga is a great example of that, and so certainly
Yeah,
this acrobatics sounds like something that's right in that wheelhouse, right?
yeah. What do you do for all that?
I do yoga, so I started with yoga, and what really entranced me was that yoga is you not competing, but you improving yourself. So
Hmm.
nobody else around you matters. It's like, it's about comfort and in your own progression.
Yeah.
And so that as soon as you get that, then you're not worried about, am I doing this right or wrong? You're like, am I doing this more comfortably and better than before? Which sounds like some of the good
Yeah.
stuff that you do with both climbing and acrobatics. So
Yeah. Do you have a good studio there that you practice?
no, I do all my, I have online stuff and I have all the kit here and a space and everything and do it at home. So
Yeah.
I
And
find my mind less competitive when I'm just doing it on my own. If I
good
go
for
to
you.
the studio, I'm looking in every direction, wondering what my class rank is.
What about for like sleep and nutrition? What do you do on that?
Intermittent fasting, and then I only eat whole foods. So
Whole foods.
I
Yeah. Okay.
try to reduce processed foods, but not always successfully, as
Hmm.
classmates and friends will attest to. But yeah, just try to make my own foods. So, but
Yeah.
I'm married to a lovely lady who is quite enthused about all these topics, and so
Mhm.
she keeps
Mhm.
me well informed of every single um new study that comes out on balance, on
Yeah.
nutrition, and all the rest. So we live a pretty healthy lifestyle.
What do you take any supplements?
I take not really. I can't say that I take them well, so I'll have a short stint of stuff for a while, and then I'll be
Mhm.
back off it. But my wife takes lots of them.
And
So
then what about sleep?
it was a blessing given to us by the military academy, given to me by the military academy. I really have no problem sleeping even to this
Mhm.
age. So 62 and sleep 8 hours, and my heart rate variability is good. And yeah, I generally do a pretty good job on that. Not always, but
Yeah.
but more often
I,
than not. Have you do? What do you do for sleep? Do you pay attention to sleep specifically?
what's interesting. I mean, you know how that was where we always had to set an alarm and get up early. Gosh, that was
Yeah,
so hard, and I think that was really hard on our bodies too, or whatever. It was not my natural thing, but um, it's nice. Most days I don't have to set an alarm these days, but I find that when I'm really active, so like I do a lot of climbing. So a lot, like I just this last weekend, I went out and climbed Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. So I spent
wow.
3 days out there climbing, and I'm telling you, Tuesday night I was whipped. I mean, my hands hurt. I was exhausted. I was hungry.
Right.
Um, and so I ate just a big meal and took a shower and I slept 9 hours.
Yeah.
I tell you, I wake up the next morning, I feel like a new man.
Yeah.
And I routinely do that. I routinely, get. I mean, I try to get 8 hours most nights, but I routinely get 9 or more hours of sleep. Um, like you, I try to eat whole foods. I'm doing a lot more of a kind of a. I have this thing now where I kind of do a meal prep. I mean, it's nice now. I have a stove,
Yeah. Right.
which I didn't
The
have in my
client couldn't get all the things in that van.
van. Yeah, and a refrigerator, which with a freezer in it that I can put stuff in. And but anyway, yeah. What I do now is I get I'll make a bunch of chicken and I'll
Yeah.
bake it in the oven.
Yep.
I have a big rice cooker, and
Yep.
I put broccoli and rice in my rice cooker,
Yep.
and
It's
I
great.
cook it, and that sort of like forms the so that brown rice, broccoli, and chicken sort of forms the basis of my meals, at least maybe 50% of my meals during the week. And yeah, and then I supplement that with other stuff as well. I take protein. I drink protein pretty much every way.
I
Actually,
do as well. Yeah, these little protein drinks of different forms, protein powder and coffee, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, yeah, that helps. Otherwise, it's really hard to get your protein levels up.
well, and
Yeah.
I don't know if it helps or not, but do you take collagen as well?
I do. Yeah, we got some of that going. I have
You know,
our pantry is quite full of
is
all
that
sorts
right with
of
all that
magical
stuff?
elixirs.
So I went to this Korean place when I was in Hawaii, and they served one of the guys in our group ordered something like it was cow's knees, and it
Huh.
all it was is that was just basically the joints, the big soft white
Mhm.
tissue that they cooked down, and it was just sort of this sticky thing. And so basically, what that was just big collagen, a big uh, whole collagen source.
Huh.
Um, but anyway, that was interesting to me to see because I've only taken it as a powder, and that was sort of
Well, how
interesting to
would
have
you
it.
consume that? Obviously, what did it? You
Well,
ordered the
we
cow's knees. What did he get? A knee?
they baked it so it was nice and soft, and they covered it with a bunch of spices. But and I had a taste of it, but it was not my thing.
Stick to the powder.
But
You
yeah,
heard it here first, folks. No cow's knees. Stick to the powder.
it was
Yeah.
interesting to like to actually to take because I've taken a lot of powder collagen, so it was interesting to actually try what it was, the whole food
Yeah.
thing. And then I think most whey protein is just basically dried out cottage cheese. It's cottage cheese that's been dehydrated, ground up into powder, and then they serve that to us as well too. So, but I take that, and then what else? I do a little bit of pea protein, so I mix them all
Yep.
together, and then I throw some greens in there too because they just say that our soil is really depleted,
Right.
and I think even whole, excuse me, I think even organic sources suffer from soil, that's been nutrient depleted as well too. So I take a few of those. I put some green supplements in there in my drinks as well.
Your comment on stepping back from alcohol is a really interesting one because I think what you point to is that when we have one organizing principle, all these other good practices fall from it. And so you chose a lifestyle more than it's not really even about the substance or the alcohol itself. It's about you just chose a lifestyle, and then all this other stuff comes from that. So whether it's balance or whether it's protein, I just find I keep my protein levels high,
Mm.
and everything just naturally kind of falls from it. I don't because I'm satiated from the protein. I don't feel like I go and having a sugar,
Mm.
candy or anything like that. That so you're on an interesting path, particularly at this age, because though we've probably either banked healthiness or not by this time, it really makes a difference in the next 10 years on how we treat our bodies.
Yeah, I listened to your podcast with Mary Ellen talking about the reunion. She was saying that this is the last reunion where it's in the fall and or sorry, not sorry, in the winter or whatever, and that in the future that they'll start sending us out to like we get to actually meet on the plane, and have our reunions in the whatever right at the beginning of the fall term
Right.
because in general at the 50th reunion people can't get around as well
Yeah,
anymore.
right. It's a real thing. It's a real thing.
Yeah, I mean my one of the things I heard this podcast, this doctor was talking about this concept of what he called compressed mortality versus extended mortality. And what I'm sorry, what he was saying was is that generally people just don't take good care of themselves, and then what happens is they get into managed healthcare,
Right.
sometime in some cases for decades,
Right.
and whatever that looks like. But they're not curing you; they're essentially just treating your symptoms and sort of like making you comfortable, as they call it. As opposed to what he was talking about, this compressed mortality, which
Hmm.
is where you're healthy, you're healthy, and then all of a sudden, right at the end, you have.
There's a short period of time where all that stuff. The other word that is aligned with that is health span. So it's not your lifespan. It's like how long are you able to do some climbing or a little bit of acrobatics, a little yoga until you can't, and then you want to increase the health span. So I'm a big believer in that, and really a lot of this work that we're doing together as a class is around the social connection and the reconnectivity, the togetherness to really help with the health span. So because if we always know we have somebody we can rely on in the class, in general, then that helps us with that element of it. So yeah, important stuff, and really important and timely stuff as we go into this next round. I love that you're doing all this stuff. Well, even back at the academy, you always were. You always charted your own course. We loved. You were in the Fourth Regiment with me, and I remember you from that.
Mm.
You're always a unique guy. What did you do in the Army before the academy? I was always curious about that.
Uh, yeah, I was in the Ranger Battalion up
Yeah.
at Fort Lewis,
Right.
which I mean, it's an interesting thing is I joined. So I got moved up a grade when I was as a kid going through school.
Yeah.
So I actually graduated from high school when I was 17,
Hmm.
and so I joined the Army at 17 and went to airborne school like right after I turned 18. What a great experience that was, going through
Yeah.
airborne school, and then going to the Ranger Battalion. At like literally at 18 years of age, I went through Ranger school. I turned 19 while I was in Ranger school.
Right.
Those were some pretty formative experiences to have early in life. I am so grateful for that opportunity. And I feel like that, I was probably on track to become just a punk,
Yeah.
had it not been for, the path that I ended up going down. Is sort of like, like the Marines, you're forged in the crucible of adversity, and it's true, right? It's like, and then going to the academy from there, I was in right when I got back from Ranger School, uh, I applied to go to the West Point Prep School, and interestingly, I think there were 20 something people on Fort Lewis that year, 20 of us who applied to go to the West Point Prep School. And the only two people who got accepted was my roommate and I, Chris Borgening.
Yeah.
So
Right.
Chris Borgening and I were literally roommates in the 2nd Ranger Battalion at
Is
Fort
that
Lewis.
right?
We
Well, that's a
both
little
applied
tidbit.
and we both got accepted,
And
which
you
is
both
really
had been
cool.
to Ranger School, which you were both famous for that in a way. I mean, that was an unusual thing. We were all looked at you with, but but you never really came off that way. This is a credit to you. Like you
Well,
always
thank you.
like at the academy, you never really came off that way. I don't know what that way is, but
Hmm.
you always just seemed like a pretty chill guy about stuff. So, and then you went on to the signal
Yeah.
branch. I think it's amazing. Like,
Yeah.
it's amazing.
I mean, I'm grateful. Well, and also, Paul, so even though I was in the Ranger Battalion, I was a commo guy. I was a
Okay.
radio operator.
Yeah.
So I carried a high frequency radio,
Yep.
which was used to basically talk long distances. So I would set up these antennas. We'd stop, and I would climb a tree and set
Yeah.
up an antenna, and then communicate. And then later it became satellite radios.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so for me, it was actually a natural progression. A lot of
Okay.
people were like,
That makes sense.
"Well, you were infantry, you were a ranger, you should be going, into a combat arms field." Was sort of, I think, what some people, some of my classmates, and some of the officers thought that what I would be doing, but they didn't realize that I had a communication. I was in the Signal Corps. And so, again, having the computer science degree, it just seemed to me that Signal was sort of the right choice for
Yeah.
me. And
I didn't know that. So the signal was actually what you did before you went to the academy, and then it was just a natural branch, particularly with the interest in computer science. So, well, that was the thing. All the infantry guys were English experts, so you didn't, so you didn't want to go that way. After all, anyway, apologies to my
and
classmates who were in
do
you.
you remember that class we took, Art of Military Warfare?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
a course!
Yeah.
That was an interest. There was a lot of interesting classes that we took, and then do you remember also we had to take a philosophy class as well
Absolutely.
too? What a
Just and unjust wars.
what a great experience that was. I mean, I think the first half of that semester we spent reviewing all of the classical, philosophies, Kant,
Yeah.
Nietzsche, all of, and which was just wow. And then the second half of the class, we talked about, ethics and warfare, which was really a cool application of all of that.
And they've expanded that now to the department there really looks into the different ethical elements of warfare now. So they've continued that tradition on, which which is pretty cool stuff. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was in that Fortran class with you back in the early, but I was the guy in the corner crying, unlike yourself, as you were over there knocking things out by 7 p.m. in bed, and your Fortran programs debugged and everything. I was up in the lab until all hours. So,
I do, and I don't know if you remember those. Do you remember those? Gosh, what were those systems? But yeah, I mean, remember we went up there to some mainframe room,
yeah,
and we worked on
programs.
these computers, and they had these gold, and it was so complicated. They had these like gold coats who ran around and like helped us,
That's
with stuff.
the gold codes.
Remember that?
Yeah. Well, that was when you learned about nesting different types of features in your programming. This idea that you'd have to, kind of debug by going in each of the procedures at a time and all that kind of good stuff. And I realized I was not going to graduate from the academy if I was pulling all nighters trying to debug Fortran. So I went into the math.
Is that what you did?
Yeah, I
math?
punched
Yeah.
out right after that.
Well,
Fishback.
that was a hard degree, also. I mean,
Yeah,
math
yeah.
was.
Captain Fishback was the
Oh yeah.
was our I don't know. He isn't literally in all this time, 40 some years, the name just popped back in my head.
Wow, that's crazy. I do
Talking to
remember
you.
that name. I don't know that I could put a face to it, but I do remember that name.
Yeah, it's just like literally just popped, I could see his face. He popped into my head.
Well, and I have to tell you, I'm doing some really cool stuff these days with AI.
Yeah, talk about that. What's your corner of it? Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously, there's the Chat GPT interface on your phone where you can
Yeah.
ask it questions, which I think we're all using. But yeah, so I mean, going back to like just like again, the tracing the path back to the old days when we were on those. Gosh, what were those servers, those computers called? But basically, it was it was just a terminal, and that
Yeah, we had those dumb terminals that went into the mainframe. Yeah.
yeah, and we did Fortran and stuff like that. But
Mhm.
so now I'm coding in. So basically, it's a screen that's split, and on one side it's got a file explorer. On another on the largest window, it's got basically the program that you're working on. And then below that, it's got the command line, the shell that you're interacting with the
Mhm.
system, kind of giving you, like statuses of what's going on. And then on the right-hand side now is the AI chat. And so Paul, in the past, you know what I mean? Like I would write a program and I had to think about it, and I had to, I would have to look at consult resources and textbooks or whatever. And then now it's all online, and just look at that. And it would take me a while to craft that. And then so recently, like in the last year, the AI has been good enough that you can just say, I need a program that does the following and
Mhm.
in the following language, and here's the inputs, and this is what I want you to put on the output. And it spits out a program for you. And you can take that and you can paste it into your editor.
Yeah.
Okay, well, now what we're doing is you just tell the chat, I need a program that does this, and it just starts modifying the files that are open in your editor.
Mm.
So it says, okay, I've looked at all these files that you have open right now, and I say, well, I have this problem. I want to do this. I want these inputs. I want it to be massaged this way, and I want these outputs, and I want it to be verified using the following things. And so it thinks about it and it says, okay, well, we need the following code. And so then it spins off more agents, and it spins off an agent to write one code to do the processing, another code to do the integration, another
Mm.
agent to do the verifying, and then it manages these agents. And I'm just sitting there. It's called vibe coding because I'm just
Yeah.
sitting there vibing out, and I just hit okay, 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 okay,
Working
okay,
on your
okay.
latest handhold for your climbing. Wow, that's
Well, what it's like doing is it's like managing a class. So at one time I had a really small class that
uh-huh.
I was teaching, and we were doing and so it was such a small class that I assigned. We had this course project, and rather than like telling them to go home and do it, we just did it in class. And so I assigned one group to do one part of a thing, and one other group to do another thing, and another group to do another thing. And I went back and forth between all three of these groups. And over the course of the semester, we just built this system up more and more and more. And we had it was a really good term. So kind of what's happening right now is the AI is just doing that literally at the speed of light for me.
Right.
And um, anyway, I feel like I have an exoskeleton on, and I'm grateful that I have years and years going back to like the beginning of the days of the computing, the beginning of the days of the internet, and the beginning of the days of sort of like of web software, because having that experience on all those things now allows me to manage these race cars, you know what I mean, that are just
Yeah.
generating, because they go off the rails and they go the wrong way all the time, and you have to correct it back. And fortunately, so it takes some experience, somebody who has experience knowing all that, to bring it back in. So it's not like just anybody can say, write me this and it's going to come out well. You have to know when the AI is doing it wrong and then herd it back in.
Right. Because you have the context from all your experience to know generally how to give it the right direction and then redirect it. Yeah. The rest of us would be less vibey if we tried to do that.
Well, and I say, I'm not exactly sure how the roles are going to be for young graduates going into the field, junior engineers, like these days. Because there's clearly those of us who have more experience are clearly more advantaged, because we can steer this. It's a very, if you will, it's like, handing somebody a race car who maybe is only a novice driver,
Yeah. Yeah.
versus handing a race car to somebody who's got more years of driving experience.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And then the larger question is, how do you get someone to that level of experience without them having to go through each of the steps,
Yeah.
particularly when our entire makeup is around finding shortcuts. So yeah, it's a great, we all want to take the shortcut, the hack, and get there, right? Yeah.
But it's pretty exciting stuff. I listen to the NVIDIA GTC, a lot of which is the NVIDIA's big
Mm-hmm.
conference they had just a few weeks ago, and it was essentially a free, and a lot of them are available on the internet, and some of them, but basically they're calling it this. What do they call it? Flywheel. That's the term that they're using. So it's this.
Flywheel.
So in the past, we had Moore's law, and basically Moore's law was related to essentially productivity output,
Mm-hmm.
and it was essentially some scale, some exponential scale going up.
Right.
But I think generally it was like 2x was kind of is what generally what Moore's law was assumed to be, and that's held for whatever, like 50 years. And that's also been tied to productivity,
Mm-hmm.
to the Department of Commerce productivity statistics. But what they're talking about with AI is that it literally it's creating this flywheel where now we have exponential growth going on in all of these sectors. So and they're showing the graphs of what of just like, so for instance, I think they call them, they measure them in data artifacts. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to geek out too much, but essentially the count of things that were out, quality things that we're outputting, and they show that historically, and it's just like all of a sudden it's just going up at
Right.
this huge thing that like has never been seen before at the accelerating at a speed we've never seen before in history. And so it's generating, and it's just generating this boom in all of these industries. I personally I've thought a little bit about, like, should I retire now, or should I hang in there for a little while longer?
Right.
And one of the things they kept asking at this GTC with all of these people that are involved in AI is like, how optimistic are you on the future, and is there going to be less work or more work? And just pretty much universally, every single person said, I'm having the best time I have ever had. And that I feel so much more productive and so excited about what's going on. Anyway, I feel in a very similar situation right now. Like
Yeah.
I kind of want to take advantage of that for at least another 10 years, if that's, God willing.
Well, it looks like you have your physical environment and Casper sorted out. You're able to still pursue your passions, climbing, acrobatics, and other things. Good, healthy lifestyle, and then you're still connected up to this thing. You've put yourself in a really advantageous spot. The only thing is you're too far for us to come out and have coffee with you. Is the only problem we got with you.
I come down to Denver pretty often.
Good.
So
Well, we're going to have to get together, and it's
yeah.
great to reconnect. Is
You,
there
do you
anything
have
we haven't covered today? Because you might be the most interesting man in the class, to be honest. I can sit here
No,
for
you know who's
2
the most
hours
interesting-
talking about.
you know who's the most interesting man in our class is Roger Carson's.
Well,
He is.
he's hard to pin down. That guy.
Do you remember that old that beer commercial? You know, what is it? I don't drink beer. The most
the Dos
interesting man in the world.
Yeah.
That's right. It was.
It actually is Roger Carson's.
That is Roger Carson's to a T, man. Sorry, Roger, if we're talking about you, it's all props. We think
it's all props. He loves it. Michael Curry, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It was great catching up with you, man. You're a fascinating guy, and I'm really delighted to be back in touch.
Well, and I really appreciate what you're doing with the class, Paul. And thank you very much for connecting everybody together. And I think like I say, I think it's the social need is something that we all have, and I'm looking forward to connecting with more of my classmates again.
Yeah,
so thanks for doing that.
It'd be great. Thanks, man. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Courage Never Quits podcast, where any member of the class of 1986 who is willing to tell their story will be a guest. To get the word out and stay up to date on the latest episodes, hit the like and subscribe button. With over 900 living graduates, we have a lot of stories to tell, and you don't want to miss any of them. We'll see you in the next episode.